Hi, everyone. Glad to have you with us for the People-Centered Internet Community Call. So it's a beautiful day here. Helen Armstrong is our guest speaker, and we're both here in the Carolinas. You're over at NC State in your office, NC State University. I'm over in Chapel Hill, all right, but I like NC State quite a bit, right, for all the things you have the design program, right, for all the universities that are here. Helen, I used to be an advisor to California College of the Arts Design MBA program. We also need to talk about whether there could ever be a design MBA program in the Triangle. That would be an interesting conversation. In any event, we're delighted to have you with us. Helen is the author of Big Data, Big Design, and as I said, is a professor over at NC State University of Graphic and Experience Design. She has 3 master's degrees, one in English, one in publication design, and one in graphic design from Mississippi, University of Baltimore, and Maryland Institute College of Art, respectively. And she's doing work today with Red Hat, with REI. She's also done work with SAS Analytics, our Museum of Natural Sciences here in North Carolina, IBM, Sealed Air, Advanced Auto Parts, and she's been a university faculty scholar. She was named that in 2018, and is very interested in the kind of usability, right, that is both experiential and is good for universal design principles, right? The kinds of things that allow people that have limitations to still fully function, within our design systems and use the products and services and experiences that we design. So we're delighted to have you with us. And anything that I didn't say about your background, you jump in and tell us, all right? I'll just remind everyone we're recording the session. If you've got a problem with being recorded, just remain silent. You can put questions in the chat. I'll call on you serially when we get to the Q&A portion of our time together. And with that, I'll say thank you for being with us, Helen. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So thanks for having me today. It's always nice to talk to a new group of people. I prepared, I have about a 30-minute talk, and I'm specifically thinking about issues around design and machine learning. Obviously, that's my field, but we can keep this casual. You guys can jump in if you want at different points. But generally, this is an overview of the space that I work in and the issues that are top of mind in that space right now, particularly around machine intelligence and design. And apologies, I do have a little bit of a cold. I'm coming off of I just recovered from a COVID experience. So I hope I'll try to keep the coughing to a minimum.
Well, you sound great right now.
Okay, good. Thank you. I was a little concerned about that.
One time I had to croak my way, having laryngitis, through a lecture. So you sound great compared to that.
Good. Okay.
We can see your charts, Helen.
Good. It'll take it a minute to transition to full screen, and then we can get going. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about design and machine learning and some of the issues in this space. So first, I'm going to say that I talk a lot about artificial intelligence, but when I use that phrase, I really am talking about machine learning which is the most prevalent form of machine intelligence at this moment. And when we talk about machine intelligence, we're really talking about a set of algorithms that analyzes data, learns from the patterns it detects in that data, and then makes predictions. And of course, those predictions might be something like, is this email spam or not? Might be sentiment analysis. So is this block of text, the sentiment in this block of text predominantly angry, happy, satisfied? Might be identifying a face. So, does this face belong to one person or another? And of course, there are many, many other examples of machine intelligence or machine learning that we come across in our daily lives. So when we say, we might talk about, for example, recommendation systems. You know, you liked this book, you're going to like this book. You liked this series, you're going to like that series. We could be talking about personalized social media feeds or personalized searches. We could be looking at behavior, so fraud detections from credit cards, or increasingly during COVID, machine learning based interview screening platforms. We could be looking at predicting values, so something like Trulia, and looking at real estate values. We could also be thinking about technologies like image recognition, or more specifically, facial recognition, talking to virtual agents, conversing with chatbots. All of these are machine learning in action. So, but why, why now? Why is machine learning growing so prevalent right now? Why do we see it so often? And I would argue there are two things at play there. One is that we are producing clouds of data as we move through our lives right now, particularly as we live more and more of those lives online. So just today, I used an ID to get in my building. I used a credit card. I might have streamed a video. I checked my email. I did a search online. So I'm wearing an activity tracker. We are producing lots and lots of data, and that's very useful because we need lots and lots of data to train these models. And then we need something else, of course, we need compute. I think this statistic is pretty astounding that as of 2018, so it's even a little bit dated, as of 2018, the compute was 300,000 times larger than it was in 2012. This gigantic increase in compute, along with cheap sensors for collecting all this data, is making the cost of the technology come down. And as the cost comes down, it's being adopted by more and more sectors. So in my world, the question then becomes, what does any of this have to do with design? Why should we care about these issues? And first, I would argue that machine learning needs design, needs human-centered research methods. Designers are trained to seek a desired future or the right thing or experience to design. Data scientists are trained to seek what can accurately be determined from the data at hand. So another way to think about that would be, let's say a designer and a data scientist is throwing a dinner party. A data scientist would plan the menu first by thinking about ingredients. They would say, what ingredients are in season, what's at hand, what's economical, and they would build a menu from there. Whereas a designer would begin with, who's coming to this dinner party? What kind of experience do I want to create? What kind of dietary restrictions are there around these participants? What have they liked in the past? What have they talked about liking? And they would build their menu from that perspective. I would argue that we need design and data science and social scientists actually to come together into this space, or we're going to end up with a lot of meals that are, let's say meals that are unhealthy and perhaps nobody even wants to eat. Designers can create a lot of interesting things thinking about the capabilities of machine learning. So we can think about personalization. We can think about creating experiences that are, in Liz Sanders' words, useful, usable, and desirable, but for a particular person in a particular context. And that's where it starts to get interesting. So this is this is part of a big project. This is a little piece that our grad students did with a auto parts company in which they were thinking about how to embed machine learning in their retail spaces in ways that would benefit their customers and their sales team. So this is a predictive maintenance app that the sales team can use to discuss not only the maintenance needs of the individual's particular vehicle that they're experiencing now, but those that they will be experiencing as they move through time. And this is an idea we can think of also in the healthcare sector around predictive medicine right now. So predicting medical conditions before the symptoms appear. This is a project by another grad student here in collaboration with the computer science department. Through her research, she found that caretakers of kids with rare diseases, the first thing they do when their children are diagnosed is they do a Google search online, and they're accosted by lots of information that they're not mentally prepared to handle, like end-of-life care. So she's working with computer science to create this intelligent hub that will present to these caretakers only information relevant to their child's particular rare disease and only information relevant to the particular phase of the disease that they're dealing with at the time. Fast food is experimenting with this idea, right? This is McDonald's intelligent digital menu. It detects an individual, and then it's going to create these kind of special combo deals depending on who you are and what's happening contextually in the area. So, maybe you particularly like hot cakes and sausage burritos. So we're going to make some kind of special combo deal just for you. And because it's really hot out today, we're going to throw in a nice coffee. And maybe something else because there's a football game that afternoon. Thinking about this idea of personalization more from a pure technology perspective, this is a parallel reality screen. We're working with these in a different project right now, or looking at these for that project. This is in the Detroit airport right now. This is a screen that can display 100 different types of content to 100 different individuals simultaneously, depending on where you're standing. So really thinking about that hyper-personalized content. All right, so the examples that I've showed you are examples of anticipatory design. So this space that we're moving into right now, where instead of users requesting something of an interface, the interface is anticipating their needs and delivering what they wish before they make any kind of request. And by the way, this is Amazon filed a patent for something they're calling anticipatory shipping. It's just filing a patent, so it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to happen, but an interesting concept for thinking about shipping things to people, anticipating what they need and going ahead and shipping it to them before they make request for the actual item. This is another project by our grad students. This is a wearable device. These students found through their research that individuals with cochlear implants are often left out of the kind of casual conversations that happen in coffee shops or restaurants. And so they prototyped a wearable device that would use machine learning to detect the noise level, the number of people that you're talking to, which often changes throughout a conversation, the size of the room, etc., and then use Bluetooth to communicate to the microphones in the cochlear implants and adjust those microphones on the fly, and ideally optimize over time to help the individual hear in all these changing settings. So again, like anticipating their needs and then providing what they need without a request having to be made. You can also think about the way I'm talking about this in terms of do it for me or do it for myself. Grammarly is another example of that. It's autocomplete features that begins to learn the style of your writing, and instead of having to complete that sentence yourself, it's offering to do it for you. But there's some problems in this space. We can also think about de-skilling. So this idea of, okay, maybe there's some things that we don't want to just automate away. Maybe there's some things we don't want to just do for people. Maybe there's some things people want to learn how to do for themselves. GPS is the classic example of this. GPS gets me from point A to point B. But it doesn't teach me how to get from point A to point B. Maybe there are times when I would actually like to learn how to get from point A to point B on my own. Patty Meese, who runs the MIT Fluid Interface Group, thinks about these issues a lot with her students. We talk a lot about this idea of what happens when we take the machine away. Are there certain innate human skills that we actually want to build so that when the machine is taken away, those skills are stronger in us? This is a device that her students made called Nevermind, where they're experimenting with the ancient memory palace technique of you take information and you layer it over a path or a structure that you know really well and use that to remember complex information. So these are AR glasses that you wear and you physically walk down a path, overlay information. But the idea is when you take the glasses off, your memory is stronger. So the device becomes more of a scaffold rather than a crutch. So I've talked about this idea of de-skilling that we really need to be thinking about right now. I would also suggest that we should also be thinking about how machine learning is changing how humans relate to machines. And that really affects the kind of things that designers are making as well. There are two types of technology here that are particularly important in this space. One is natural language processing and one is computer vision. I'm going to talk a little bit about natural language processing. So there are two researchers, Clifford Noss and Scott Brave, and they wrote this really wonderful book called Wired for Speech. And in this book, they did study after study to try to figure out if we bring the same natural biases and cultural baggage to talking with a machine that we do when we talk to another human. And what they found was that indeed we do, that it's very, very difficult for us to overcome those biases, even when we know, even when the voice that we're interacting with is very overtly a synthetic voice. We have evolved over thousands of years to expect anything that speaks to us in human language to be another human. And it turns out it's really, really hard for us to overcome that. And this matters because people are talking to machines more and more. So in 2019, Facebook's self-care chatbot Wobot was receiving 2 million conversations a week. 2022, Amazon had sold over 120 million Alexa devices. 2020, hundreds of thousands of people were each sending 70 messages daily to Replica, which is this, you may be familiar with Replica. It's a kind of, we were talking about digital twins earlier. It's a kind of personal AI companion that learns from your personality and sort of mimics it back to you. Microsoft Xiaoice, which is a popular social chatbot, primarily in China, has 660 million users. So this raises questions around how these kinds of relationships might be opening us up to manipulation, and whose interests are these relationships really being formed? And you can ask, who does Alexa really work for? She doesn't work for you, right? This is a fun little ironic virtual agent that one of our grad students created to play around with this idea of manipulation. This is this little agent called Bebop. And what Bebop does is if you don't address it in the way it prefers to be addressed, it hurts itself. So it'll like get a black eye or its arm will break. Eventually it'll die a really gruesome death. She's just playing with this, the way that these devices can manipulate us emotionally. Theorist Sherry Turkle raises this question: even as we treat machines as if they were almost human, we develop habits that have us treating human beings as almost machines. So what are the wider implications of this type of natural communication with machines? Yuval Harari takes this even further when he asks, what happens when your refrigerator is more attuned to your emotions than your partner is? But I would say I fall more on the camp of Subaru Kumampati when he warns us that we can't just bypass the development of social emotional intelligence in machines. Because if we don't focus on creating machines with adroit social emotional intelligence, we're going to end up with computers that don't understand us and don't need us. If we truly want to work together with devices, we've got to develop this kind of intelligence that we can understand, that will allow us to connect and relate. This is a project by the studio Tellart in the UK, working with Toyota's advanced design team, which they're really thinking about how the kind of emotionally intelligent experiences, the kinds of relationships we're going to have with autonomous vehicles, and how do we design those experiences. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about how machine learning is changing what designers are creating. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about how the technology is changing how we design. So I'm sure many of you have played around with GPT-3. This is the playground that OpenAI has out. This is a little tool that Sharif Shamim built a few years ago. It's really interesting, called Build. This is a tool that allows users to generate code for a fully functioning app just by describing it to GPT-3. And since this came out, there are a lot of little kind of plugins and add-ons to a lot of existing software platforms that allow you to do this, to describe what you want and then generate the code in that way through natural language. There's been a lot of talk lately around text to image transformers. There's DALL-E, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion. So really thinking about how this might affect how people interact with creative tools is an interesting topic, right? The same kind of technology that's allowing us to very intuitively, the same type of technology that is allowing users in general to speak to machines, to interact naturally with machines, will affect the way that we communicate with our tools. And maybe the very idea of a tool is going to grow a bit irrelevant. Maybe our creative tools will start to feel more like a natural extension of ourselves, of our physical bodies. So how else might machine learning affect design practice? Well, we can also think about this in terms of complexity. So the former director of machine intelligence at Adobe, Patrick Hebron, talks about this idea of scaffolding complexity. And he uses the example of the Florence Cathedral versus the Burj Khalifa. So the Florence Cathedral, from conception to completion, took 140 years to complete. The Burj Khalifa, which is a much more complex building, took 5 years. So he talks a lot about this idea of machine intelligence enabling creatives to do even more and think even bigger. So to think on a scale and a level of complexity that's hard for us to even envision now, because we can't hold all that information in our minds simultaneously. But how can we work with machine intelligence to expand that scale, to expand that complexity? But maybe that's not even the most interesting way to think about creative output or creative process and machine learning. Janelle Shane, who's the author of a wonderful book that I would highly recommend called You Look Like a Thing and I Love You, suggests that working with AI is a lot less like working with another human and a lot more like working with some weird force of nature. So she gives the example of David Ha at Google Brain, who asked an AI to assemble some parts into a robot to move from point A to point B. And he expected, of course, the AI to construct this nimble little robot that would run from one place to another. But what it did is it took all the parts of the robot and just piled them into a big tower that could then just fall over and land on point B. So maybe if we want human thinking, we should probably go to humans for it, as Hebron suggests, because there are a whole lot of humans out there. But if we want to bring a different kind of perspective to our projects, then perhaps that's another place where AI can play an interesting role. But AI has no understanding of consequences, of course. Humans bring that understanding, as Shane suggests to us. We have to define, AI will work really hard to solve problems for us, but only the problems that we give it. So we have to think really carefully about framing those problems for an AI system, and also thinking about the larger consequences. There are many critical issues around this technology, around bias, privacy, manipulation, surveillance. And there are a lot of designers and researchers working in this space as well to begin to take on some of these issues. For example, Joy Buolamwini founded the Algorithmic Justice League. This is really dealing with what she calls the coded gaze, so thinking about facial recognition and bias around race and gender. Sarah Gold in the UK at her studio IF is doing great work thinking about digital rights. Her teams are really addressing ethical issues around collecting and using people's data. So she's given great lectures on this topic, really thinking about policy, privacy, data collection. But her studio also puts out this library of interaction design patterns for helping designers think about how to allow people to query these systems in moment of use and to understand their rights around these systems. Stephanie Yee and Tony Chu, the founders of R2D3, they created this wonderful interactive visualization called A Visual Introduction to Machine Learning, specifically to help designers understand how these systems work. There are lots of other examples out there of visualizations of these systems in action to help people understand what's happening within these black boxes. Mimi Oniowa, she's an artist and a researcher who thinks about data, but not the data that's being collected, but the data that's not being collected. So really drawing our attention to what we're saying about our hidden social biases and differences by not collecting data on particular topics or populations. And then Leah Coleman, who's a designer who, in partnership, collaboratively with the Partnership on AI, created the Making Art Responsibility Field Guide, really helping artists think deeply about this technology, how to use the technology ethically, how to think about some of the questions that they need to be asking when they're working with this. So I'll conclude with these thoughts that we shouldn't trust a technology that doesn't have any true understanding of human consequences to take the lead here. We really need to be taking the lead as humans for thinking about these consequences and thinking about the kinds of problems that we actually want to use the technology to solve. And that there is potential to use this as a mechanism for equity and justice. Specifically in design, we need to be thinking really carefully about the kind of projects, features, experiences that we're choosing to make and choosing to not make. And that finally, that the skills and visions of designers are really needed in this space to think about human needs and human consequences. And I'd like to add at this point too, social scientists, right? So important for involving them in this space. Kevin mentioned at the beginning, I do have a new book out, Big Data, Big Design, that digs deeply into some of these issues that I brought up, and a lot deeper on the ethical issues. So, check that out if you're interested in that. And with that, I will open it up to questions. And I don't have my chat turned on, so I'll turn it on so I can also see some of those questions.
Great. Thank you, Helen. That was a good, succinct, but compelling view of the way that you're thinking about this space. We do have some questions. Let me just before we get there, your book is that available directly from a Helen Armstrong website, or do we go to the usual suspects? We go to the Amazons and the Barnes and Nobles and the Better World Books?
Yes, usual suspects.
Okay, very good. Just want to make sure. Sometimes there's a special place where the author says, you want a signed copy? Here, go over here. All right, fantastic. Let me start with Ron Suarez. Right, he was the first to post a question. Ron, I'm sorry. Please join us. We would be delighted to hear your question for Helen.
Hi, I posted my experience with Comcast, which is not that different from most others. I'm wondering about AI for maintenance. The problem of my connection, which was up and down for months, was that a squirrel had chewed the end of the cable. It took 3 service calls, and finally I had to get an old router out of my basement because the Comcast router wasn't dealing right with going in and out of bridge mode. And I knew more than the maintenance guy coming to the house. And I'm working with communities now trying to do co-op DIY ISPs. So I'm trying to figure out, other than using things that are more reliable, too much technology there to go into in this question. But other than that, I wondered about AI systems to back up doing maintenance and support for problem solving.
So I think your squirrel example is really interesting because that's a contextual problem, right? That an AI system might not even consider. So I actually think that's a great example of, we can't just turn things over to these systems, particularly now, because these systems, we're just entering a space where these systems are beginning to understand context. And at the moment, we really need that human perspective. So for example, I've been doing some work around using natural language processing to create these kinds of summaries of workflow for knowledge workers. So like you get to your desk in the morning and there's a summary there of everything you've been working on and what are the key issues coming up, and what are things you need to think about this day, et cetera. And it's all generated by an AI system, but things are always left out of those systems. And so the work that we've been doing is thinking about, how do you tap into each of those predictions in a way, right? Each of these statements about what's happening that you need to be thinking about, and go through the data that was used, if you wish, to generate those statements so you can question their validity, but then also thinking about places where there's human generated commentary that works alongside AI generated commentary, because the AI at this point in time is going to leave things out. They'll leave out that really human perspective. That's a very long answer to what you're asking, which is, I think that the two, AI and humans, would have to work together in those spaces to really have a more complete perspective on the problems that are going to come up. And something like, I had a similar Comcast problem where it took, it was over a year to fix this problem that our neighborhood was having, and it ended up being a physical problem, not something super technical.
Yeah. You mentioned that AI needs, perspective, from humans. And I would suspect that as that intelligence builds up, that, the inverse, all right, is that, they're going to have to inform each other because they have different kinds of intelligence, right? And so that becomes a yin yang of, I need your perspective on whatever it is. Okay, we have Doug Hoolan. All right, next up, Doug.
Yeah, I really appreciate your talk. In fact, I just got your book. I put in the chat the link to it, so looking forward to reading that. I came from Bell Nokia and talked to Bell Labs, user interface group on various technology. Especially, I was working on automated vehicle technology. I'm interested in this concept of human AI centaurs, where take the best of human ability and the best of our computers, artificial intelligence, to amplify to solve a problem. So a question I have is, what do you think by 2030, would we look back, what do you think AI will have the most impact on what sector? Would be my first question. And second is, what solution that will AI have that will really surprise us? It's like, okay, well, we didn't see this coming, and it's amazing that the AI solved this problem that we weren't expecting.
Ooh, those are hard questions. What sector? That's a really interesting question. I do think that I'm, as all humans are, biased by my own experiences here, but I do think that GPT-3 and both I think transformer models moving from generative algorithms that are moving from text prompts to generate text, or moving from text to image, are going to impact not only creative communities, but so many communities. You can think about legal spaces that are generating, or any type of knowledge worker who's generating reports, for example. Those reports are going to be, we can automate the creation of those reports in really interesting ways using natural language processing. I think that, so I'm not sure I can delineate one sector. I do think the creative sector is already being heavily impacted by generative algorithms in particular. But so I'm going to talk more about technology across sectors. I think that particular technology is really going to impact more sectors than we're realizing right now. And to me, it's very interesting when you're generating content from an AI, going back to this idea of not understanding context or not really understanding consequences. You have to build systems that allow us to question or query that content. And if we're not building those systems, we're going to end up working with a lot of content that we can't necessarily rely on, but that we're going to rely on. And people tend to rely on AI systems actually more rather than less. They tend to trust those systems more than we would. In research tends to find that people actually trust those systems more than they should, rather than the inverse.
Yeah,
so
a great example is the automated vehicle technology, right? It's level 2. It will aid you if you're using it properly, but it will kill you if you're using it improperly.
Yes, yeah, it's a great example. So I'm answering your questions in a little bit of a roundabout way. I think it's more, for me, it's more about the technology than the sector. I think it's going to go across hit a lot of sectors very hard and raise a lot of questions that we have to deal with right at this moment in time. And I'm going to use that as my second answer, my answer to your second question as well. I think those generative algorithms are going to be the thing that, particularly around natural language, there's a lot of buzz around them now, but I'm not sure that I think we're underestimating them a bit.
Yeah, I really like the creative element that you answered. In fact, there's this new website. They went from DALL-E, which is pictures creation, to now video creation. There's now some where you can say, I want to see a cat dancing or a space and see this incredible thing. So, and no, I really like your answer. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Fantastic. Anil, you're next. Please join us. Anil.
No, I don't have any question, actually.
Okay.
It's a wonderful talk and I enjoy.
All right, very good. Ben Kosinski.
Hi, excellent. It's thought-provoking and the multi-dimensional, multiple lenses involved. I had we tend to focus on a human-centered or a tool algorithm-centered discourse. I'd love to see a taxonomy of patterns of engagement. So we move away from the artifact of a human cognitive agent and a tool, cognition, which seems to have seeking and aspiration towards the human side, and neither are true. And so we're absent ethics, we're absent explanation, we're absent empathy and other things like that on many of them. I wish we had a taxonomy that we could create a discourse on different kinds of engagement and give focus then to our design issues. Just a thought. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting thought. At this moment, I'm very intrigued by the work that's being done around beyond human thinking. So thinking about looking at other types of intelligence, looking to nature, thinking about viruses, thinking about stuff on a cellular level, or thinking about fungus, or thinking about octopi, or thinking about different kinds of intelligence, and then the kind of systems that are already in place in the natural world, and sort of symbiotic systems that are out there. I think there's some very interesting models there that are sort of human-centered, to your point, tool perspective, that is very limiting, that can really expand the way we're thinking about how we work with technology. So I think that space is super interesting for those kind of conversations.
I think that's an excellent point, because we come from an age of an industrial age and centralized and decentralized structures, human centered design. So we have that bias in there, and that yet we almost act surprised when we find that nature has fundamental design abilities that are extraordinary. And so we tend to be surprised about that. We'll probably be even more surprised when we see things, as we're doing now with AI and art, that we have a sense of something that we would give creative attribution to, or a sensory experience, control and influence. And nature really informs. We need to take those many lenses. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, that, the recent headlines about organic chemistry is, it's really interesting if you study organic chemistry, how that works at a foundational level, and how that can be the building blocks for a lot of biomimicry. But at any rate, next is Mike Nelson. Mike joins us, Carnegie's Endowment for Peace. Great to have you with us, Mike.
Thanks, and thanks for a very useful talk. I have about 6 or 7 questions, but I'll start with the first one.
Don't give them to me all at once. I'll be in trouble.
Well, the first one's really easy. Is there a way to get your slides? Are you willing to share them?
Sure, I'm happy to share them.
Just send you an email about that. Well, the more complicated question involves how to design systems that explain where the data is coming from in all of these machine learning applications. One of my colleagues, Matt O'Shaughnessy, who's just joined us after getting a PhD in machine learning technology, just wrote a piece called "One of the Biggest Problems in Regulating AI is Agreeing on a Definition." So I was glad that you limited the scope of your talk to machine learning, which is actually a much more useful term, and also a little less scary than artificial. But the fact is, here in Washington, everybody's rushing to regulate AI, when most of the problems just involve algorithms that process a whole hunk of data. And it can be spreadsheets, it can be machine learning, it can be neural networks. And in each case, rather than trying to regulate the algorithm, we should be trying to understand where the data is coming from and what the quality of that data is and what portions of the data is being thrown away. So my design question for you is, as we think about data policy and how to ascertain whether these big data crunching systems are doing it right, how would you label them? We've spent 30 years, 50 years trying to write nutritional labels, and we're almost to the point where people can read them and understand them. But this problem of data provenance, data quality, data omission, this is much more complicated, and yet it's really important that people using these algorithms and people abused by these algorithms know what kind of data sets are being used and whether they're the right ones or whether they're purposely biased. So big question. And if you can give me the bibliography of 3 places I should look on this question, I'd be very grateful, because I have seen hundreds of people ready to regulate and standardized algorithm design. But this other bigger problem is, I think, more important.
So there's so many things there. Yes, the data itself is a huge problem. Where is the data coming from? How are we getting the data? How do we want to regulate, what data is being scraped? Can we scrape copyrighted data? Can we not scrape? I mean, it's, and how do we alleviate bias in data from a society that's biased? So the data is going to be biased. Do we create systems that proactively try to limit that bias? Do we do in this kind of social engineering in that way? I mean, it's like that there. So there's a lot there. And of course, it's even more complicated because often it's very expensive to train these models. So companies are often just buying pre-trained models off the shelf and then using them. The classic example of that is ImageNet, the huge database used for image recognition that was highly problematic in terms of its taxonomy and classification system. But and it was a research project that was sort of edited over time because of all the problems with it. But many organizations, nonprofits, had adopted that model to use in their own work rather than training their own. And that's what most people do. That's what they can afford. So what I'm trying to say is it's even like 3 steps removed. Like, there's a problem initially when the models are trained with the data that's been collected, but then someone else just uses that off the shelf for a different purpose, who has even less knowledge of what data was collected and how the model was trained. And then someone else adopts that model from the second company. So there's this so provenance is a huge problem because we keep removing it from the original source. I have done so, and nutrition labels, you bring that up. I mean, that's IBM likes to talk about that, and various other people as well, though, that we create these kind of nutritional labels or these audits for data sets, which I do think is very useful within the data science world. But the idea of being able to create a label or audit for a data set that a lot of people adopting the technology are really going to understand, that a non-data scientist is really going to be able to absorb. I think that's very challenging. So yes, on the labels and the auditing, but we have to be realistic about who it's going to serve. To your point, I mean, there's been talk in the press, right, just recently about putting nutrition labels on the front of foods, etc. And let's be honest, people still don't understand nutrition labels. I mean, that's been a design problem for a very long time. And I think it's a nice example of how challenging it's going to be to create these kinds of labels that people can understand for much more complex systems than nutrition. So all of your questions are very good, and I don't have easy answers for them. I have done projects around querying and looking at the provenance of models for data scientists. And there's a lot of work that can be done there just through simple being able to drill down visually and to keep drilling till you get to the raw data. There are things you can do there that are, it's a really rich space, but that's really for the people who are training the models or managing the models rather than the typical user. The typical user needs to be able to query systems too and be able to drill into the data. But when they're drilling into data, they're drilling into a different level of data than a data scientist would, if that makes sense. Like the example that I gave of the summaries of your workday, or it could be any kind of report that an AI is generated, and a typical user needs to be able to question things, information, and figure out where the AI came up with that information. So that is very doable and very useful, but that doesn't get around that. That doesn't fix bias in the data sets. It doesn't address the way the models were trained. It's more addressing the data that's informing the AI on a much more surface level. Is that making sense?
That does make sense. And let me just push a little harder though. What really is the problem is that people are ignoring this big bunch of data. They're so focused on the algorithm, and the average person is focused on the algorithm. They find these cool new tools and they know it's software and they play with it. But most of them have no clue what data set they're plugging in or how they used it. I'm just desperately looking for some way to make data sexy. You know, we say data science is sexy. Big data was the big sexy job title to put on your resume. But data itself is seen as incredibly boring and just a whole bunch of numbers in a relational database. Is there anything that you've seen that would get people, particularly 14-year-old junior high school students, excited about where data comes from and whether it's good or bad data? I'm desperate here.
Well, that speaks to, now I'm getting off on something else, but that speaks to supporting data literacy with our middle school kids. Because if you don't understand statistics, you can't really understand data. So
everybody's doing coding because that's cool, and building a little piece of software is powerful. Collecting data seems boring.
Well, I think collecting data can be really fun. I'll send you, you can look on my website. I did a project in collaboration with SAS where we created all kinds of different prototypes for how to make data literacy fun for middle school kids and to create tools to do that. And you can make anything fun if it's well designed, any topic. But that has to do with really taking data literacy, particularly in at-risk schools, seriously, because those are the kids that have the least access to data literacy in the classroom and least access to tools for understanding data. And also that those very issues are going to impact them way more as they move through their lives. So if you can give them the tools to understand how the data is being collected, what kind of data is being, if you can give them just the intellectual tools to do that in middle school, then that's going to allow them to talk back to those systems and ask questions, ask those really important questions when their lives are being impacted.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I will check out your website. I'm also interested in making 77-year-old senators and cabinet ministers literate about data. And at some point we should talk about copyright. That was question number 7 on my list, but I know others have questions.
Thank you.
Well, I'm just gonna add on to that. I do think visualization is very, very useful in understanding data collection and data sets. That machine learning, and this doesn't help. It doesn't address what you're talking about, which is what data is being collected, how it's being collected. Although that could be visualized as well, but visualization is a really powerful tool for understanding how things work.
Yeah, Ben Schneiderman has been a frequent speaker on this group, and he's a master of both the visualization and the human-centered AI. So I've learned a lot from him. But any references you can provide, I'd be very happy. Sorry, Mark. Sorry to take so much time.
Okay, thank you very much. Greatly appreciate it. Next up is Mark Prinsky.
Hello, thank you for the talk. I think the most interesting thing that you said for me was that maybe the very idea of a tool will grow irrelevant. And I'm wondering why the idea of a symbiotic human being who incorporates all these new things is not more widely seen. We see it as adversarial. We talk about tools and scaffolds and crutches, and can we use these things to make the human side better? We're one thing. We're humans and technology. We help the technology clearly grow. It helps us. If it's, the same problems that have been there for a long time in terms of ethics are just human problems. They're not any different because of the technology. There are different scales perhaps, but they're not different problems. So the idea that came into my mind, and I'd love your reaction to this, is for a metaphor, it's a different culture. It's like if we are in one culture and we look at another culture, we don't say, how can we make them more like us? How can we use them? How can we exploit them? How can we do that? We just say, how can our two cultures work better together? And why is there not, the last guy who was on here talking about AI poo-pooed symbiosis as something that some guy wrote about in the 1960s. What's your thoughts on symbiosis?
I think it depends on what you mean by symbiosis. There was a very influential HCI paper written maybe 3 years ago, and it was titled something. But it was all about integration. This notion that we're integrating the technology into our bodies and into our minds.
Mhm.
But that that doesn't have to. What does that mean exactly, right? You can do that in lots of ways. It doesn't have to necessarily be, like some kind of cyborg-like creature that we become. So because I think that's where our minds go a lot when we say the word symbiosis. So I think perhaps that's some of the pushback, is that we all look to the sort of entertainment industry and take things to extremes when we say that word. But I think it's a really rich territory. I think it's happening already, and I think it will continue to happen. I agree with the point that thinking about working with different types of intelligence, that to me is a key question of the moment. Whether that be AI or whether that be what I was talking about before, just non-human intelligence in general, how do we embrace and work with different types of intelligence? I think that is, we are in a moment where really interesting work is starting to happen in those spaces. And I think that's where we're going to make a lot of big jumps in the next decade.
I like that. Can you add some bibliography on that, please?
Yeah, there is so this is a little separate from that. Let's just try to see if I have this book around me, but so Kate Darling wrote a really interesting book around, and this is
The new breed.
Yes, A New Breed. A New Breed was maybe it came out a couple of years ago, but I think her work is very interesting in that space. She's thinking about AI and looking at the relationships that humans have had with organic creatures for a very long time, and then thinking about how those kinds of relationships can now be forged with AI. So she looks at, like, I don't know, how humans and dolphins have worked together, how humans and birds have worked together, how we've kind of worked together to take on problems. So that's one that just pops to mind immediately, that I think is a great read too.
She usefully analogizes the relationship that we have with pets in our home, right? And that, that you would think that, the technology that's getting designed right now that will help take care of, people who are moving on in age, right? The kind of healthcare robotics that I look at in Japan. The first manifestations don't look like, a human being taking care of you, right? it looks more like Paro, all right, the seal, all right, that, you know, sleeps with you, all right, and keeps you comfortable in the nursing home, all right, looks like other things. So I really, you're right, that's a great book.
I think what is desperately needed is a new metaphor beyond the cyborg. Because you're absolutely right. The cyborg is a very frightening metaphor. It's a metaphor of us versus them. And
Right.
what's going on is the absolute opposite of us versus them. It's us evolving. We don't say our eyes are a tool that we should be wary of. They just evolved to help us. And so how do we take that perspective with the technology and not say us versus them is something that I'm really interested in pursuing.
Yeah.
I
I mean,
think
one
that's
of
a
the
great
first
point.
things that we, go ahead. Finish your
No,
thought.
I just said, I think that's a great point that we need to get beyond the cyborg.
In healthcare automation, one of the first things that was popularized that came directly out of manufacturing and factories was the little carts, right, that bring the parts to, you know, the automobile assembly or to, you know, something else, became the delivery mechanism for delivering drugs to the patient's, you know, bed or to, you know, other, you know, supplies, you know, from the supply closet, as opposed to, you know, something that was, you know, much more intrusive and scary, right? Little cart with stuff. Oh, I need that. This is good. All right. Is a scale up almost like a Roomba, right? It's nobody's scared of their little vacuum cleaners and the likelihood that, you know, they could do more, bring you more things, you know, do more tasks and not be scary is pretty good. In any event, let me go to, before we go forward, we're at our full hour, right? So now what I want to do is thank everyone who joined for our first hour, you know, listening to remarks and Q&A. Helen, thanks for that. We're going to go into overtime now. And if you could stay with us, we'll have, you know, some additional questions and then we'll, you know, absolutely end at or before 1 o'clock. With that, if anybody needs to go, we thank you. So I see comments in here from some people that we've heard from, Anil and from Ben. Anil, anything you want to add to the discussion?
I don't have anything to add to the discussion as such, but I think this has been a very thought-provoking presentation. I was a little apprehensive about it when Helen began, but I think she's taken us into a dimension that is enriching. And as Mark said, beyond cyborg, I mean, I think there is because there is almost traditionally the AI, the original thinkers, many of them sort of made human versus AI as a logical progression. And I think we need to look at how we can create this symbiosis that we're talking about. And Kevin, you talked about healthcare, and this is the area that I'm doing a lot of work using AI in healthcare. And the problem there is, how do we make AI, machine learning, big data, and all that augment the physician who's doing the treatment? And how do we focus on the patient outcome rather than the process of that? Because eventually it should get combined with the intuition of the physician and whatever tools that are available, both AI and non-AI tools, to have a better outcome. So I think that kind of thinking has not really, I haven't found something like that, but some of the things that came up here make a lot of sense, and I'll definitely look at it. And I think that I would like Helen's views on that, because I know she started with the health sector, that how does she see this happening? I mean, or anybody else.
So that's a really interesting question. I did do a project with IBM, and we were thinking about healthcare data and healthcare records and securing them with blockchain. And then once they're secure, we were looking at the possibility of what would it look like if people held their own healthcare records and shared them with physicians, because right now obviously they're held by the physicians and sometimes shared with the patients. But it relates to what you're talking about in the sense that then you're thinking about what the project was really thinking about was, how does AI, how does an individual collect data about themselves, their own healthcare, and then how do they get insights from AI around that data and their health? And then how do they share that with their physicians? And then how does the physician do the same thing, get insights around someone's health using data that's been collected in various ways? And the bottom line was, it brings, those issues really bring up this idea that you've got to have AI insight and human insight working side by side. And you have to have the ability of the human to be able to edit the data that's being collected when necessary, both doctor and patient. So you have all these levels of agency that have to happen in order for those forces to come together productively within the healthcare sector. If it's, you have to have patient, you have to have data, insight, and physician all working together on a more equal plane than they do currently, in order for trust to be established across all those different domains. So it's a super interesting space. There was a book that came out maybe 4 years ago called something like Predictive Medicine, and the whole book was about machine learning in the medical space, but a lot of it was the kinds of things that you would imagine, like, let's have a virtual agent who sits in a doctor's office and listens to what the doctor says and then documents it and translates it to the patient, things like that, which, yes, but that's not, that's more going back to the comment before about thinking about AI just as a tool. That's not really the doctor and the AI working together, to the doctor, the AI, and the patient working together to end up in a place that is more advanced than we can now reach. That's just the doctor or the patient using AI as some kind of tool. So all those forces have to trust one another and work together. And I think establishing that trust is a super interesting space in healthcare right now.
Yeah, and the continuous telemetry that increasingly becomes possible, right, is a very interesting space for machine learning, because it was very episodic before. You go in, you take some tests, all right. Now with the kind of devices that we have to be able to monitor things continuously, machine learning can play a great role in the pattern recognition that signals the doctor you need to do an intervention. It's becoming very interesting. You should, sometime we should talk about the work that Toto is doing in smart fixtures for the washroom to be able to continuously pull samples, all right, in addition to just getting rid of the waste. They're doing that, right? That's underway. Okay, Mike Nelson, you're back in queue, my friend.
Thank you. Long time ago, even before I met Kevin at IBM.
That's a real long time ago, Mike.
It was. I worked in the Clinton White House, and we had a real tug of war over intellectual property and new technology. And I managed to prevent us from going down a path that the European Union did to create a new right, like a copyright, for databases. And we're now about to see some extension of copyright law into the machine learning, artificial intelligence world. The Supreme Court is considering cases this year, which could have some play in this. Do you have a take on whether something created by artificial intelligence should be given some kind of copyright? I mean, where do we draw the line in terms of protecting the creation and creativity of an intelligence. This is a whole nother lecture. It's
Yeah.
at least an hour-long discussion and gets into philosophy and law precedent. But I just find this a fascinating issue, and I'm really scared that we're going to do something that just completely bollockses up the opportunity to create new things with AI, because we're going to copyright we're going to somehow claim that the input was all copyrighted, or we're going to somehow claim that this algorithm gets to take advantage of our copyright law. And there's also the problem that, we could have the AI developer claiming copyright over anything produced by their software.
Yeah, I mean, you make all the points, this is the huge problem. And
I just asked the questions. You're supposed to give us the answer.
well, I don't have the answers. I remember reading a case in Scandinavia maybe 6 years ago where they were thinking about how do we give AI ownership over creative output. And I mean, that, to your point, is a huge question right now. Can we treat AI as an entity that has the capability of copyright? That's like a whole thing. And then to your point, are we going to, in this knee-jerk reaction, because there's certainly a lot of outcry in the creative community right now around DALL-E and Midjourney taking existing artistic creation and then creating new output that uses the style of an artist, like a copyrighted, or not the copyrighted style, but the style of an artist to create new artwork that's going to take away work from those artists. I mean, that, there's the same thing with music right now. There's a huge outcry against that. But then how do we protect those individuals without over copywriting so that we can't use these tools? I don't have an answer to that question. I think it's a fascinating question and really critical right now.
I wish
I did have the answer.
I'm hoping that the precedent that gets used is one that came out from the courts about 3 or 4 years ago. You may remember this incredibly funny photo that a monkey took of itself, a chimpanzee, when it stole the camera from a photographer. It was a brilliant photo, and we've all seen it. It's gone out, hundreds of millions of times. And there was a question whether the monkey, somebody filed a suit on behalf of the monkey saying that it had the copyright. And then the photographer filed a suit saying, no, actually it was my camera. And the court said, nope. The monkey created the art, and the monkey is not a human and can't get a copyright. So maybe if monkey is equivalent to AI, then we're going to be in good shape. Anyway, thank you very much again. Great talk and lots of great questions.
You're welcome. Yeah, I had a big conversation with Adobe about this because they create so many creative tools and they're integrated AI into a lot of their tools and creates all kinds of challenges for them.
Yeah, that kind of circles back to what we were discussing before about data training sets. And I might ask you to either comment directly or think about, would there be such a thing as a design data or a design training set for, which would be more of a set of interactions that a system would need to learn, not just data. It's a hypothesis. Next is Mark again, and then Ben.
Hi. So I would love to go back with you to what you talked about a little bit with young people. And you talked about how we should train them and what we should do with them for this new world that we're entering in. And my sense is that the best thing that we could do is not teach them either statistics or data analysis or all this kind of stuff. That's important, but that we should give them these tools as early as possible. when they're 3 years old, to let them know that if they say something, a picture will be created from it. If they have this thing, because that's the only way we're going to really see what these tools can do. If the new generation becomes native with it, I'm the digital natives guy, but if they become native to this generation at a very early age. So I'm wondering, the question is, do you know of any efforts that are being made to do things, this is kind of like the Raspberry Pi efforts in computers and stuff like that. How can we get these tools into the hands of not just middle school kids, elementary school kids, and have them figure out for themselves what the real uses and repercussions and things of these things. So if you know of any, or if you want to work on it with me, that's what I do for a living, is really try to help kids move to the future.
Well, I think I would say two things. One, I think that speaks to making sure that these generative algorithms are open source and accessible to people. I mean, that's the first step, right? So that they can get in the hands of kids really early, and that's affordable. So I think that's one piece. I go back though. I do think that data literacy is important. I think that if you don't get if I see my students right now, and they are increasingly being interviewed by AIs for positions, because they tend to work in the tech sector, and that's just the way it's going, where you go through this interview first that's led by an AI, and it's analyzing everything you say and do, and then you go to the next level or you don't go to the next level. And being able to ask questions around those systems because of the bias that exists in those systems is, I think, really important. And that, when I think about like school kids and the kind of over surveillance of school kids right now in the classroom through these systems and the problems with that, I think those kids need to be able to stand up and ask questions about why this is happening, and point out the weaknesses in these systems. And I don't think they can do that unless they have some sense of how these systems work. They have some sense around asking questions around the training of data sets. That sounds like super technical, but I don't think it has to be super technical. I just think they have to have a basic understanding of how these systems work. So I think that needs to start early too. But I agree with you that in terms of, I 100% agree that these systems should be in the hands of, first graders. They should be playing with them.
How can we make that happen? The interesting thing is that the young people don't, all the things that you said about the biases and pushing back and all the understanding exists with humans. Any human interviewer has all that kind of stuff. We never teach our kids how to push back to that, or how to understand that, or how to recognize that. So it's not a new problem we're facing. It's a human problem we're facing. And it would be, I think it would be in all our interest to see it like that, and not separately a tech problem and a human problem.
I think it is, except that I would say with when you're looking at these interview systems, the companies are hiring something like HireVue, which is an AI internet platform, to conduct these interviews for them, but they can't. The platforms that are using the technology don't actually understand how their own systems are making decisions about who to hire and not to hire. So the companies can't ask questions of those systems around who was hired and who wasn't hired.
Explainable AI, we need it, yes.
Yeah, so I think that is the difference with people. You can at least ask people why they made a decision to hire someone or not, and we can't ask these systems those questions right now. So that doesn't.
I'm going to leave one comment that suddenly occurred to me in this. People are the greatest black boxes of all. We are so upset about the systems being black boxes. Each individual person is a huge black box that we can't see inside. And so we ought to think about that as part of the metaphor that we're talking about.
No, I 100% agree. And we don't even understand how our own minds work.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It was
Thank you,
really a
Mark.
good session.
Ben, we're coming up to the top of the hour. Please
I
join us.
understand. I understand. Time issues. I wanted to make a couple quick comments and following on that, and the issue of imagination. I want to encourage and strengthen the imagination of the child, but I also don't want to create early crutches that stifle imagination, that draw them to a tool that may cripple their imaginative activities. We need to be careful about that. And that's partly why understanding a fluency of data and a literacy of it gives them a means to criticize and to question. And so you need concomitant with the abilities of the tools, you need the critical ability to challenge, which is frankly a part of childhood imagination that we tend to lose as well. But my comment was really about the issue, why I'm so excited about you introducing and contributing the designer perspective on it, because we tend to cripple that in looking at the data science side and analytics side of it. To me, the core challenge of the 21st century is about reallocation, decision rights, and authorities. And I get concerned when we try to spend most of our time trying to fix the 20th century. And I look at something like the medical domain that we're talking about. We're talking about augmenting the decision rights and authorities. We know that RNs and physician assistants are sometimes the better decision authorities than the physicians God themselves. And yet our protocols are tied to an assumption of physician as God. And then when we look at the payor side, payor introduction and Epic and Cerner and others coming in there are more billing focused than they are physician health than patient health. If we go to first principles and look at why I keep coming back to a taxonomy of the engagement, I want to look at health. I don't want to talk about driver automation. I want to talk about transport. And we need to relax some of our baggage from the 20th century to get new creative insight into some of these uses here, because it leads us into thinking human versus system. And instead of that, symbiosis is much more of associated with the problem, not of the actors. We tend to focus on the actors. Other than that, I have no opinion. Go ahead.
So thanks everyone for a vibrant hour and a half with Helen. I'm going to turn the call back to you, all right, for closing comments based on what you heard, the kinds of questions you received today, and then we will say thank you for being with us. Helen.
Well, it's been a great discussion. I really appreciate all the comments and questions. They were, very interesting for me. So I really enjoyed participating. I'll put here's my website address if you're interested in any of the projects that I've been working on that are in this space. So there are a lot of those posted there. I can, I think I can put together, Kevin, do you want me just to email you my slides and then you can?
Yeah, I'll make sure that everybody receives them.
Okay, I'll do that with my slides. I actually have posted on my website. I'm going to put another. This might be of interest. This is a seminar. The first part you're not going to be interested in, but these are the readings from a seminar that I teach. This is a link on and if you scroll down, there's some spaces in there around AI with lots of readings and lectures, etc., around those topics. So that might be of interest. And then I heard questions around data collection and questions around symbiosis. So I could put together, just a few interesting readings around each of those topics, if that's of interest.
That would be great. I mean, as you can tell, this is a very thirsty audience that reads a lot. So unlike, every once in a while, the students that show up, they say, oh, I didn't read that, right? These folks will read it, right? Which is good. You've got the prodigal lifelong learners right here. Well, we really appreciate you coming in on a Sunday to your office where the lighting and audio is really great. And we appreciate all the work that you're doing and that you shared with us today, Helen.
You're
And
welcome.
you're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat, and looking forward to digging in more into the work that you're doing. And if we have some pointers or some resources for you, we'll certainly send those back in your direction.
Sure,
Thanks so much, everyone, for being with us. Have a great Sunday. We'll talk to you in 2 weeks. Cheers.